Welcome to Organizational Sherlocks, the podcast where business meets psychology and your organizational puzzles meet their match.
Join us for captivating stories and practical solutions to unravel your toughest challenges.
I'm Dr. Elizabeth Fleming.
And I'm Morgan Ashworth, your guides to a prescription for business success.
Let's dive in.
So, listeners, again, excited for this episode. I think I say that every time, but it's because we really do try to curate our episode topics for you guys, making sure that they're actionable, things that you're going to use and also learn from. So, today, I kind of want to talk about why so many KPI systems feel like report cards rather than motivational tools. So, maybe it's not the metric that we're measuring, but the psychology of how we present it.
Yeah, absolutely. I know KPIs are a conversation that comes up a lot with my clients, especially when they're, maybe a leadership team is tasked with coming up with KPIs or reporting back on their progress towards KPIs. And so I think this is a great conversation and one that maybe we can provide a different view on, maybe an alternative solution that helps it kind of be a little bit more successful.
Yeah, yeah. So just to lay the foundation for you guys, ultimately, this episode's going to explore how teams engage with KPIs in a way that feels motivating rather than punishing. And instead of defaulting to, pressure, shame, or heavy consequences when goals are missed, our conversation is going to examine how gamification, psychological term that maybe some of you have heard before, can instead make performance tracking more energizing, meaningful, and sustainable. So our focus is going to be on applying psychological theories as normal, though we're always going to put them in layman's terms for you. And this will help leaders design KPI systems that encourage progress, ownership, and overall healthy accountability.
Yeah. Yeah. And when I think about gamification overall, it's something I've definitely incorporated into my work internally, but also with clients. And sometimes I will be honest, I'm curious your perspective. Sometimes I get people who say, well, it's kind of childish. Like, why are we making this into a game? Right.
Mhm.
But I don't see it that way, right? Because we think about just general motivation
Mhm.
and performance anxiety and fear-based management and all of those different things, which I know we're going to explore in this episode together. But
Mhm.
gamification kind of changes the oh God, I'm going to use the word game, changes the game, because you're not focusing as much on all of those kind of those anxieties or those fears. You're focusing
Mhm.
on what makes progress visible or
Mhm.
what is rewarding,
Mhm.
and really kind of looking at it in that way. I'm curious if you see it
Mhm.
similarly or
Yeah. No, I mean, I think there's different levels to gamification too. I feel like you could get to the level of gamification, which is just, metrics that are visual and able to be seen. And there's, clear, reachable goals within KPIs, there's clear numerical understanding. But then it could all go all the way towards gamification in the sense of, making cute little signs and having like bells and things along those lines in the workplace. That's more like visual, auditory, like physically connected to. But all in all, if you think about it, for our listeners, what keeps you playing a video game? What keeps you watching that football game, right? It's actually gamification. So video games are gamified to make you want to get to the next level, to keep you on that game and always going for the next challenge, right? That's the same idea within the workplace, but it's real life circumstances, real life KPIs. Same idea for a football game. What keeps you engaged into watching that football game? It's all the steps that they have to take to get a point, to get that kick, to get that touchdown, or football in the sense of soccer, to get that goal. So what keeps you engaged? It's the gamification itself, and there's different levels to it, and sometimes certain levels are seen as more quote childish, yes, but I think we can look at gamification as simply getting the numbers down on paper as something to strive towards, as a goal-based gamification. It doesn't always have to be playful.
Mhm. Absolutely. Well, and I mean, I think I really like that you're talking about kind of the sensory elements, the visual or even, the auditory, kind of all the different sensory components. I think that's a really important thing. And but it also makes me just think generally about goals, right? And I mean, ultimately, KPIs are goals, right? They're goals that we're striving to achieve, and that brings into mind for me goal setting theory, which is really about making those KPIs very specific and achievable. Many of our listeners may have heard of SMART goals, the acronym SMART goals. This can be really, really helpful. You know, they're specific, they're measurable, they're achievable, they're realistic, and they're time limited.
Mhm,
KPIs can be created in that same exact way, right? And goal setting theory helps us understand that specificity and the ability to achieve them, if we are looking at kind of incorporating some kind of psychological theory, right?
mhm. Okay.
Now, that doesn't necessarily mean gamification, right? That we can make goals without using gamification. However, when we then kind of add in that layer of motivation, and what motivates people, and keeps them engaged, I really think that's where those sensory
Mhm,
components come in. It's where kind of the cognitive, kind of interest. How do we keep people interested and
mhm,
engaged? It
mhm.
just adds an extra layer to goal setting theory that wasn't originally part of that theory.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, if you think about it, we have the extrinsic motivation versus intrinsic motivation. So
Mhm.
extrinsic is meaning you're getting some sort of external rewards related to, operant conditioning. It's followed by some sort of positive reinforcement. Meanwhile, intrinsic motivation means that there's some sort of internal level of enjoyment towards this. And so if you can make the, achieving of KPIs more fun, more joyful, I guess I would say, like something that you can enjoy, something that you can experience, those sensory things that we were talking about, then you're going to get higher levels of intrinsic motivation towards
Mhm.
towards those KPIs and that goal and those goals, which is what turns it into that gamification, that gamified process.
Yeah. Well, and I just want to make or add one point to the kind of motivation side of things, because when you're talking about intrinsic motivation, right? And I guess maybe just for our listeners, extrinsic motivation might be praise from your supervisor, your
Money.
leader, or money, or a gift card, or whatever it might be, right? That's more of those extrinsic pieces. But that intrinsic motivation is really comes from within, and what that looks like may be different for each person, say on a
Mhm,
team. So I think that's important for leaders to recognize, is getting to know who's on your team and who's working toward achieving these KPIs will
mhm,
help you to kind of tailor the experience in a way that, um, kind of, increases the chances of success, if you will. And I'll just offer just like a quick example. Like, I'm someone
mhm,
who loves tasks. Like, I like to have a list. I like check boxes where I can check off my list, right?
mhm,
That is motivating to me. Like, that in itself is gamification, right? When I can
mhm.
check one thing off and get all the way through my list, I
Yeah,
feel intrinsically motivated
yeah.
to do more, right? That might not be the same for other people, right? There are people who
Mhm,
hate having lists,
mhm,
and much prefer that, kind of the external validation piece of things. And so,
mhm.
again, I think it's important when we think about motivation to understand who's on your team, what
Mhm.
are they motivated by, and then tailor the experience.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think that kind of plays into the whole it depends within industrial organizational psychology. And in fact, I was even having a conversation regarding our current the work environment I'm internally at. And we were talking about how even, the problem solving or the decision making regarding a certain situation, it always depends on the person, on the customer, on the situation. Same idea for when it comes to motivating employees. It's you have to have an understanding of what motivates your employees in order to best motivate them to get those goals. Yes, there is a sense, there is a necessary sense of self accomplishment as well. So that there needs to be a level of self accountability within those employees. But I would argue that as a leader, if you can recognize what motivates your individuals, whether that be intrinsic or extrinsic motivators, then you're more likely to help or get your person, that employee, that staff member to achieve the goal you want them to, even if they might not have that self accountability in a way. Self accountability, yes, important, but I think having an understanding of those motivational factors helps you be that much more successful as a leader and helps your team be that much more successful since you're achieving organizational goals, not just individual goals
Yeah.
within that.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I agree with you. And I do think too, as a leader, I guess it's not really gamification necessarily, but there's a lot of power too in having kind of giving folks the latitude to make some decisions about how goals are achieved. I may say,
Mhm.
Morgan, our goal is to do X, right? And we need to get there. How you get there is totally up to you and
Mhm.
to your team. And I think there's a lot of that can be really important. And that in itself can be kind of
Yeah.
a game as well, right? Like if you're a Tetris player, for instance, right? You might like figuring out how to get there and how to put the pieces together in a way that's going to help you achieve them. So,
Yes, exactly. I mean, I feel like you gave one of the most basic examples of gamification. It's checklists. It's that
yeah.
ability to check things off, whether it be checklists on like a virtual to do list or checklists on a physical notepad. I'm sure our listeners who watch see that I'm constantly taking notes. I truly am constantly taking notes because I'm always thinking of things and I'm always adding to my to do list or something along those lines. And that checklist is a great way to hold yourself accountable because you've gamified it for yourself.
Mhm.
But then you can take gamification to the next level, with spreadsheets and with different sorts of tracking figures. And I mean, it's going to sound funny, but there was a conversation back in the day with a sales manager I was coaching who um, previously she had set up um, like the Super Bowl was coming up. And so for quarter one goals, she set up like a little football theme. So again, this is why I think of football earlier on in the episode. And she almost had the people as like players and they went up on this magnetic whiteboard as they got closer to their goal for sales, which ultimately helped them get their quote touchdown.
Mhm.
So there was that gamification and there was a level of realism within football and it was relating to something outside of the workplace. Now that's kind of the more playful, I guess, quote unquote childish, not necessarily childish. Childish, it's a good use of fun in the workplace because
And
fun in the workplace is critical.
we can have fun in the workplace. I think that it doesn't have to. I mean, we have to do our work, of course, but I think we can have fun. I like having fun.
I
So,
mean, for us in the US, most people are at their office 8 hours a day, 40 hours a week. And so we're spending a significant amount of our life at work. Why are we not going to make it fun? It should be something we enjoy. And then
yeah,
that also, again, would play into a piece of the intrinsic motivation. If they're enjoying it, whether that be what they do, their team, the systems they're working with, something along those lines, they're just going to be more naturally motivated.
sure.
Um, though I'm sure there's extrinsic factors related too.
Yeah. Oh, for sure. But I mean, there is a lot of research that suggests
Mhm.
that people who enjoy their time at work
Mhm.
or feel connected to folks do stay longer. So
Yeah.
there's some benefits there as well.
Mhm.
But
Mhm.
I know we're talking about some of kind of the more, I guess, what we would
Specific
maybe consider to
examples.
be
Yeah.
games, right?
Yeah.
But it also makes me think about just some of the platforms that folks use or some of the software tools that are kind of being implemented in organizations. So take, for example, like a dashboard, a KPI dashboard, right? That has a workflow built into it. So the one that I'm most familiar with is Power BI, which is a built on Power Platform, a whole thing, whatever.
Mhm.
We're not going to get into the technology of it. But I can tell you that, in having built them before, it's really cool because the workflows, you can see at what step, like where are we in the process, right? Whether that's
Mhm.
goal related or a client service that you are engaging with, whatever it might be. And so you can see kind of using almost like progress bars or maybe there's a celebration of some kind, like a milestone celebration, something like that, that kind of helps you to see where you're at. And that can be something that is utilized in the workplace, and
Mhm.
that in itself, even though it's a productivity tool, an efficiency tool,
Mhm.
um, all of those things, it is still in some ways kind of gamification, right?
Mhm. Mhm.
Like, how close am I to meeting my goal, right? How long
Yeah.
is it going to take me to get there?
Again, it might
You know?
be the more basic black and white type of gamification, which is not the quote childish, playful, fun ones, but it's
Right.
still fun in the sense of it makes it visual. It makes it,
Yeah.
you know, sensory in some way, shape, or form. And there's multiple components to it. So it's not just progress bars, it's also those celebrations. It might be other types of goals or consistency markers or even visible
Mhm.
streaks as well. That could be all incorporated into a singular dashboard for these
Mhm.
individuals. In fact, I think so, makes me think of a previous dashboard I looked at, which basically there was a dashboard for like a summary of the entire team with each person on it. And then there was a kind of like a prepare dashboard, like one that shows them where they're going to be at a couple months from now. Then there's individual dashboards and support dashboards, all within this one piece because you can see not only where you're at, but where your team's at. And I think for those environments where collaboration is critical, team based goals, team based progress bars, and visible streaks is super important to recognize.
Mhm.
Again, I'm going to relate it back to sales because sales and KPIs are tend to go hand in hand. A lot of times sales teams have quotas they have to meet or goals they have to meet. They might have to get beat last year by 5% and that's considered quota or 40% even. That's what the sales teams are like, right? Depends on the industry you're in. But anyhow, if I think of a sales team, they could be, maybe the team as a whole is in the green for their goal, but there's a couple people in the red from their goal, but they hit their quota markers. So as a team, they've managed to hit the company expectations, but maybe individually, a couple people had bad months, something along
Mhm.
those lines, is what I think of. So for those environments where collaboration is key, team-based goals and visibility is very helpful in those dashboards.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and I think too, just the interactive kind of component of many of the dashboards available today, again, like Power BI, um, that makes it kind of fun. So to your point, I think outside of sales, just even in like consulting, for instance, for those that are working in consulting or want to and are interested in doing like a more of a productivity model, a lot of
Mhm.
times the dashboards that are built in my experience can be built in a way that you can see the team, right? But then I can really like dial in and look at how is Elizabeth doing or how is Morgan doing. And
Mhm.
I think as it's gamified in that I can say, "Ooh, Morgan is beating me by one
Mhm.
client or two clients or whatever it is. I want to achieve more." Right? I'm
Mhm.
not super
Mhm.
competitive, but maybe other people are. Well, okay, that's not true. I am when it comes to ice hockey, but other than
You're
that,
like,
not really.
"Okay, yeah, you're competitive."
Okay. Okay, fine. I'll take that. But, thinking about kind of those pieces, right, of, you know, being able to look at the whole picture, but dial into areas where you're really interested. Take that
Mhm.
same example I just gave between, you and I, and
Mhm.
say we have our leader, right? Maybe there's a
Mhm.
leader leading us, and they want to understand who can they spend extra time with to help them succeed. They can also utilize those
Mhm.
dashboards to be able to see where is Elizabeth at, where is Morgan at, and how can I help you, right? And
Mhm.
so again, building that connection between leader and employee, but also allowing that employee to have some accountability about where they're at as well. So
Mhm.
that speaks, I think, to your point of the self accountability, but also the oversight of a leader as
Mhm.
well.
Yeah, and I was actually gonna say, yes, dashboards and gamification are great for, motivating your team to get to that next level as a leader. But for you as a leader, it helps you look at where performance is at before it drops, is what I'm going
Hmm.
to say. It helps you see where performance issues might be happening before it's too late.
Hmm.
So that way you can intercede sooner and help your team sooner. Not usually teammates, those that are reporting to you, team members, but it's so critical. And KPIs are measurements of performance, right? There's qualitative measures, those more quality type measures that are, you know, like verbal constructs versus the number based constructs. Um, But all in all, I think it's great to see where other people are at from either the team member level or a leader level. And
Hmm.
I think you honed into something really important, Elizabeth. You get that gamification when you have a healthy level of competition,
Hmm.
whether that be against yourself or against other team members. So I guess that drives into another point behind gamification is, recognizing for improvement and not just top performance. And so that can be for those people competing only against themselves.
Mhm. Yeah. No, I completely agree with that. Gosh, now I'm stuck in my head about whether I'm competitive or not, but I think there's a high likelihood I might be Morgan. I don't know. But yeah, no, it's not just about, to your point, that top performance. Yeah, that's important, and it's important to recognize folks. But how are people, like, what steps are they taking to get um to achieving their KPIs, right? Are those KPIs realistic? Are they, too high of
Mhm,
too high of a goal right now? Are they too low, right? I think all of those
mhm,
things are really important to keep in mind, and honestly, it's making me think a little bit about just how KPIs are developed, and I know that's not exactly what we're talking about right now, but just
mhm.
to go back to the
It
kind of
plays a
dashboards.
yeah, it plays a
Yeah, like,
part.
it's a part of it for sure, yeah, like, it just going back to kind of the dashboard part of it, and I this is something I'm doing in my MBA right now, so for our listeners, I'm doing an MBA because why not, and I would like to,
More education.
and I mean, I'm a lifelong learner, so of course I wanna keep doing it. But it's making me think about just even some of the, like, yes, kind of seeing real time where we're at is helpful in those dashboards, and there's an ability to add more predictive analytics in there as well. You think about, like, how do you define those KPIs? Well, what is your 3-month moving average, Can you run a regression or something to try to understand where are you going, right? What does the trajectory look like, and try to predict that out so that
Mhm.
you don't have KPIs that are so vastly out of reality, so you really are keeping them within. And then guess what? If you beat that, awesome. Like, that's an awesome place for recognition. But let's be realistic on the front end, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, I think realism to create those gamified programs is so, so important. Sometimes I see individuals, set multiple tiers to goals, even, once you reach this goal, then like your next goal is to like, try to get to this tier. And then once you reach that goal, try to get to this next tier. Um, so yes, realism is so important because just like realism is important within gamification, realism is important within actually measuring performance. Because if
Mhm.
you don't have reality within your metrics, you're not going to have reality within actual performance management and performance reviews and your ability to rate your employees and to, promote them or get them raises or, note that they might not be due a raise for another reason, right?
Right.
So realism is critical to what you're doing. Yes, weekly challenges, progress board, bars, milestone celebrations, et cetera, et cetera. Those are all great things to put into your gamified programs. But if they're not realistic progress bars, they're not realistic milestone celebrations, then they're actually going to defeat the purpose of
Mhm.
your gamified program. And I know
And
you're,
people won't use them.
yeah,
People won't use
exactly.
them.
People won't take them seriously, and you will have put all this work into something that isn't being paid attention to, if that makes
Mhm.
sense. And I know, like Elizabeth, you were mentioning Power BI being one of those common programs.
Mhm.
But let me tell you, if you're just starting out, go on Excel, go on
Yeah.
Google Sheets. You can develop a program just within that system. These spreadsheet systems have programs within them to, help you make it more visual, make it more pretty. And then on top of that, make graphs and all that type of stuff to review after the fact. Again, making it kind of pretty visual in a way.
Absolutely. Yeah. For those who don't know and want to get into it, the way you do that in Excel is using a pivot chart. So you can do that so it updates real time as your data updates.
Mhm.
We could provide a link to a cool YouTube video with this that kind of shows a little bit about how to do that, because dashboards don't have to be, built on those big
Mhm.
platforms. You can use Excel. Obviously there's pros and cons to that, because there's
Yeah.
maybe a little bit less customization in, say,
Mhm.
Google Sheets or Microsoft Excel. But
That will make it work too.
there's still ways to make it work, absolutely. But I think the biggest thing, if I'm being honest with you, kind of in this conversation that's sticking with me, is all of this is so important, but none of it will be successful if we don't do change management right,
Okay.
and get people on board and get that buy-in
Mhm.
and help them understand why it's helpful. And so I know that's not necessarily the topic of our conversation today, maybe a secondary conversation we could have, but
Mhm,
if gamification is something you're interested in deploying and using within your organization, think about how and what will you need to do to get people on board with it.
mhm, mhm. And one thing I always tend to say is when I'm developing a KPI system, I tend to want to first measure motivation, see
Mhm.
what they're motivated by. And then take that, also talk with them. Talk with them and be like, hey, so this is what I'm thinking for measurement. These are your current KPIs. This is how we're currently measuring them. What are your thoughts on measuring them in this way? Or, kind of building that buy-in before you start creating that program. That's part of the change management. Um, and seriously ask yourself though, do you have fear-based KPI management at the moment? Because if you do, you're going to have a significantly different change management process than someone that simply doesn't have the best, current KPI tracking.
Mhm. Yeah. Well, and I think too, that's a great place. This is a wonderful example of where IO psychology comes into play, right? This doesn't mean you have to go out and, if this sounds interesting to you and something you want to create and use in your organization, it
Mhm,
doesn't mean you have to go out and hire someone, somebody new or whatever it is. Like maybe you need a little bit of support from a consultant or something like that. But I would encourage you to just think about what is, um, like what will you need, right? How will you measure that? And do you have internal capabilities to measure, say, motivation, for instance? If not, there are plenty of folks out here, us included, that do that work and love that work. So
mhm,
just I think taking kind of an idea of what
mhm.
it is that you're looking to do and then deciding what is the best path to get there.
Yeah. And I like that you say, like, we do both partake in that, both Elizabeth and myself, kind of for similar and different reasons at the same time. We're in the same space, but we have different focuses.
Mhm.
One of mine is actually gap analyses. And so I recognize gaps in organizations. And one way I do that is by the measurement of KPIs and seeing where performance currently sits versus where it could improve. And then, finding gaps from there.
Yeah.
So it there's a lot of connectivity to KPIs in the workplace. Some people measure KPIs very professionally, in a way of like, these are exactly the quotas and the KPIs we have to hit, versus other individuals kind of know their KPIs, but they're kind of generalized. I do recommend trying to quantify those KPIs in
Yeah.
some way, shape, or form. It is going to make your life as a leader so much easier when it comes to evaluating your team and recognizing the needs of this team, and then also to connect goals to the organization too. Um,
Yeah.
Performance connects to everything across an organization. It truly does. We're po- we're talking about a small area of it, which is measuring performance in a way that people want to achieve goals and want to achieve these metrics, specifically honing in on KPIs. But we're talking about it because it's so important and it's connected everywhere else. It's a web of KPI in the organization.
Oh, absolutely. I think so much of what we do is interconnected. We just don't always realize it. But I do agree that the quantifying that information is really helpful, and sometimes it can be hard to figure out how do you quantify people factors, and there
Mhm,
are ways of doing that. And so if you're interested, reach out. We'll be
mhm,
happy to talk about that with you, because there are absolutely ways to quantify things that may seem like they're
mhm.
more intangible. So just kind of keeping that in mind.
Yep.
I mean, ultimately, I think what we're talking about though is that KPI systems, this interconnected nature of performance management, all the things that we do, it shapes kind of the culture, right?
Mhm.
And so gamification can be a great way to kind of infuse a level of kind of energy into a place where maybe energy isn't typically found, right?
Right.
Or some level of creativity as well. And so thinking about motivation and understanding what motivates people,
Mhm.
gamification can be a great way to motivate people and
Yeah.
again, bring in some of that energy. So
Yeah.
why not try it?
Yeah. All in all, a good KPI system does not just measure performance, it teaches people how to and motivate people to make progress.
Absolutely. Yep. I completely agree. Um, Well, this was a great conversation today. I appreciate it. I will say to our listeners, though, if there are things, again, we say this every week, but if there are things you want to talk about or want us to talk about, or you want to talk about with us, please let us know. Reach out on LinkedIn or via email, whatever works best for you. We'd be happy to chat with you. We're really excited about some of the guests that we have coming on in the coming months. So please keep in touch with us and keep listening so that
Mhm.
you can hear about other IO topics that I think are top of mind for a lot of people in the working world.
Yeah. Yeah, and we're super easy to find, Organizational Sherlocks, it's our name. So Organizational Sherlocks on LinkedIn and just organizationalsherlocks@gmail.com if you want to shoot us an email. Again, happy to talk with you on screen or off screen regarding your KPI situations or anything else IO related.
Absolutely. All right, Morgan and listeners, this concludes another intriguing episode of Organizational Sherlocks. I'm Elizabeth Fleming.
And I'm Morgan Ashworth, reminding you that the journey to success is an ongoing investigation.
Stay curious, stay strategic, and keep utilizing insights to decode your business mysteries.
Join us every Friday for your next Who Done It. This is Organizational Sherlock's closing today's case.
We will see you next time.